Hello and welcome to Knife Chats, a channel where we discuss the history of cutlery as well as offer reviews on affordably priced knives for the user and collector alike. Without further ado, let's see what today's video is about. I thought I'd take a minute to talk about this knife. You see it in the end credits on this channel all the time and at Knife Chats. It's basically a kit knife, and what I did was I bought this blade online. It also came with this brass guard, did not come with the handle, and if you look, it's supposed to look like a file. It's not truly a file or anything. It was not made from a file, but it was designed to look like a file. Now, before I go on, yes, I made this, but it was a kit. Or a partial kit. It's not like I actually made a real knife. I'm not a bladesmith. I don't pretend to be a bladesmith. I have all the respect in the world for people who actually make their own knives from start to scratch. But some of us don't have that time or talent to do that. And so buying a blade and putting a handle on it can kind of be fun, and that's what I did. So I made this, true, but I did not make the blade. In any case, have no idea what kind of blade steel is in here. It takes forever to sharpen, I know that, and doesn't hold the world's greatest edge, but don't really worry about that. I still enjoy using it. And like I said, it came with the brass guard, did not come with this handle. The handle is actually an elk antler that was supposed to be a dog's chew toy. And if you've ever worked on a knife, I will tell you now, do not use elk antler for your first attempt. Elk antler is a pain to work with. It's very hard. It's unbelievably hard to cut, and I ended up having to drill a hole because this has a rat tail tang. I had to drill a hole into this elk antler all the way back to here, so about 4.5 inches into this there is a tang, a rat tail tang going in there with a nut at the end, and then I had to end up filling in that hole with a bunch of marine epoxy and everything to get it all in there. You see up here a little black spacer and then the brass guard and everything, so it's fit there really well. It's not going to come out or anything, but talk about hard to get in there. Elk antler is very hard to work with, I'll tell you that right now. In any case, there's a slideshow at the end that will show you step by step what I had to do to make this knife. And yeah, I'm kind of proud of what I did. True, it's not like I made a real knife from scratch, but putting a handle on a knife is not the easiest thing to do. And I really enjoyed doing it. I've done it with about 4 other knives so far, and probably will do it with a few more. I've also rehandled old knives that with a bad handle and stuff, so that was fun too. But the basics here, the blade is approximately, well, let's flip it over this way. You can see it's approximately 4 inches. The thickness of this blade, if I can do this, is about 3/16 of an inch, and 3-inch cutting edge here, and it's really just a nice drop point blade. And the handle is about 7-8 inches long, but it really feels good in the hand. And the really cool thing is it's really balanced right there because of how long that tang is, how long the handle is compared to the weight of this blade. So it feels really good in the hand. It's like you're not holding anything. So I think I did a really good job with it. In any case, stick around for the slideshow, and it'll tell you everything I had to do in order to make this knife. So I figured if I'm going to make knives, I also need to have a name for them, and so I came up with Marsh Cat, mainly because I kind of like bobcats and because I live around a bunch of wetlands. And so Marsh Cat for that part, and then because this is a hunter style knife, it's the Marsh Cat Hunter. And so here's the blade as it came. It's like I said, a 4-inch drop point and brass guard. And here you see the rat tail tang that's inside. I had to cut off of the rat tail to about here, so there's only about 4 inches instead of the full 5 inches that are here. And then I put a little nut down here to give a little bit of a block once it was all the way in there. And this is a picture of the elk antler as it arrived. I bought it through eBay, and you can see that originally it was about 11 inches long, way longer than what I needed. But I did like this end here, and I thought that would look really cool on the end of a knife. So I wanted to keep that part, and I had to decide just how much of this I was going to cut off. And so I determined basically that I needed about 5 inches of this so that I'd be able to have a good grip on the knife. In retrospect, I'm kind of disappointed where I decided to cut, because that left basically 3.5 inches over here. And if I would have decided to maybe cut it here instead, this handle might have been a little shorter, but I would have had another nice piece of stag that I could have used for another handle. So something to think about when you start cutting up stag is just if you can get 2 handles out of it or 1 handle out of it. In this case, I probably could have made 2, but because of where I ended up cutting, this is a little too short to use for another fixed blade. I didn't mention before, but basically this was cut using a hacksaw, and I actually dulled one hacksaw blade and had to go back and use another hacksaw blade to finally get through all of this. So elk antler is not the softest material in the world. Next up, if you notice, here's the blade. Now I've put some painter's tape over the edge so you don't cut yourself up. And that's something you're going to need to remember to do. You got to put some tape over the sharp edges so you don't hurt yourself. And then we see the last part that I'm going to be using, which is the guard. So we got the 3 main parts: the handle, the guard, and the knife. And now we're ready to start putting things together, almost. Okay, with the exception of a Dremel tool, which I use for some sanding and polishing at the very end, the only other tools I used in this were the hacksaw that I mentioned, and then these 2 files, a triangular file and another triangular file. And I used that to actually drill the hole through here. To start the hole on this, I actually used the punch on a Camilla's utility knife to start drilling the little hole and making a bit of a depth into it, and that was able to get through maybe 3/4 of an inch into there, and that worked good enough to get a guide hole for these for the files. And then I started having to go in there and start grinding it out using files, and that took probably a good 1.5 to 2 hours to finally get the hole as deep as I needed it. Actually, when it got about 2 inches into it, I actually tried using a drill, and all it did was keep just tearing my drill bits to bits, and I really had to just rely on the files and shove them in there, and then just start turning it by hand and keep digging and digging, and then shoving it down and digging and keep going and going until I finally got the hole deep enough. And you see here it's getting closer and closer. And then what I also had to do once I got it deep enough is I had to start digging out enough of it so that this portion here, which stops the blade from spinning, would also fit into here. And so I had to file out even more on both edges to get that part to go into there also. So once I had everything fitting, what I needed to do next was get this sanded down a bit so that it would match. So there was shoving it in place and then sanding this down a bit and shoving it back in and sanding a little more of the antler away until it was close to matching what the guard would be. And after I did all that, I then filled the hole with marine epoxy about halfway up, and then put the nut on the end of the tang, and I shoved it all the way down into there and then I had a little black spacer there and the guard in place when I was doing that. And obviously there was more epoxy than needed, so the epoxy kind of squirted out the side, which I knew it was going to do. And so I wiped off the excess epoxy and let it sit overnight while it was all clamped in place so that it would remain nice and straight. And when I went to clamp it in place, I threw some wax paper over it so that the epoxy would not stick to everything. And it worked out all right. I mean, I had a little bit of wax paper that I had to remove, but I was able to do that with just some rough sanding and everything. And then finally, I had to come back through with a Dremel tool and clean everything up and do some more sanding and get everything to mate up into here and get the brass guard and the elk antler to kind of run into each other smoothly. And if you notice here, I've got a little bit of a finger choil here so that your index finger just rests nicely against the guard. And it worked out pretty well, I think. And so there you have the finished product. Like I said, it was a kit knife. It wasn't, it's not like I had forged the blade or anything like that or did any kind of heat treating or anything, but it was still something I made myself using various parts and putting it all together, and it's actually quite enjoyable. And if you are interested in making knives or something like that, this might be a good way to start off. If nothing else, it's kind of a fun, relaxing hobby in a kind of a warped, twisted sort of way, especially when you're working with elk antler. Any case, hope you enjoyed it, and I'll look forward to showing you some other knives that I've made in the near future. Thanks for visiting. If you like this video, please share it with a friend and consider subscribing to Knife Chats. To be notified of future episodes, don't forget to ring that bell. As always, your comments are welcome and insults are cheerfully ignored. Remember, you're only as sharp as your knife.